If I were to tell you that there is a disease older than humanity and is responsible for every one death in every 7 of us, what would you have guessed? Ebola? Cancer? Pneumonia? The answer will surprise you. Hello everyone, welcome to Harry's Book Cafe. Today let's talk about John Green's Everything is Tuberculosis. Now, for many of you probably already know John Green. He's this incredible YA writer. His most famous novel is The Fault in Our Stars, or Looking for Alaska. He was not, and still isn't, a medical expert. The whole enterprise about the new book, nonfiction, actually came from his visit to Sierra Leone in West Africa, where he met a young man named Henry who was suffering from tuberculosis. Made a quick friend with Henry, and that really ignited his desire to find out more about this still really a big problem in our world, this disease, tuberculosis. Now, from now on in this review, I will refer it as TB just for the ease. Now, in Victorian time, TB is also referred to as consumptive or consumption. The reason for that is because, unlike other bacterial infections, TB kills its victims or the patients much slower. So the degeneration, this decline in your physical appearance is noticeable from day to day to day to day. But it does take a much longer time than other forms of disease, and therefore people refer TB as consumptive because you can see the decline over a longer period of time. For a long period of human history, this disease is untreatable, incurable. Until very recently, I believe in the 1950s, late 1940s, when the first cures start to appear and tuberculosis becomes something that is no longer a death sentence. The book tells us that TB has a fascinating history. In Victorian time, TB has been romanticized as an illness that only seems to affect the creative type, the poet's disease, the writer's disease, the artist's disease. The reason is quite understandable because there are a lot of famous writers that did die at the hand of tuberculosis, and it seems to affect a lot of artists and writers, which isn't really something that's strange. It's because it actually affects every one human in 7 of us, and therefore it seems reasonable statistically speaking that those writers and artists are also being affected. But in the Victorian time, it's often been romanticized that the disease tend to only affect the creative type. Moving forward, however, that romanticization has changed completely and it became stigmatized. Funny, right? So it's really just tipped completely to the opposite side. And this is most obvious in America. This is most obvious amongst the upper middle class in America, white American population. Those people tend to think or believe quite strongly that TB is something that only affects the black population. So yeah, as you can see, it turns completely on its head from romanticization to stigmatization. The book really informs you and quite authoritative on this too polarizing part of its actual history, which is, I find, fascinating. There are also other really interesting facts. When I read the book, I just find, oh wow, I never knew that. So a couple of interesting factors here. Before New Mexico was a state, the American federal government was very sort of suspicious of New Mexico, largely because most of the population there spoke Spanish as their first language. And large population of the area was not white, non-white. However, New Mexico had a ambition to become state, and what they did was advertising New Mexico as this arid, desert-like landscape, which was very good for the consumption TB patients. And that advertising marketing campaign worked. Large amount of white population who were suffering from TB flooded into New Mexico. And because of this influx of white population, the federal government was in the end forced to recognize New Mexico as a state. So you can safely say that it gained its statehood largely because of TB. Other very interesting thing is that he mentioned the start of the First World War. He did qualify by saying that First World War will still pretty much happen without TB, but TB also played a interesting part. Now, I don't want to tell you this part because I want to leave some interesting facts in the book. So when you actually read it, you can find out the logics linking TB to the assassination which caused the First World War. There are sections in this book that tells you a little bit more about the biology side of TB, and other bacteria infection can really kill a patient pretty quickly, whereas TB does that rather slowly, and therefore many people in Victorian time refer it as consumptive and consumption, which we have referred already. The reason, the biology behind it, is because this particular bacterium, tuberculosis, has a rather thick outside cellular wall, a cell wall surrounds the actual bacterium itself. And this makes the human immune system very difficult to penetrate that wall, and therefore making the bacterium rather powerful. The downside of that, however, is that in order to produce that thick protective layer on the outside, it does take the bacteria a long time to make that layer, and hence the slow reproductive period, and hence the slow in which that a patient can die. Once the cure becomes available in the late 40s, early 50s, most Americans and the West got rid of TB fairly quickly. However, this is the statistics I think will shock you. In 2024 alone, 1.25 million people died from TB in this world, mostly from West African region, 70 years after the cure for TB has already been invented. The main reason for this is because many big pharmaceutical companies in the world has very little incentive to give up their patent and to produce generic, much cheaper version of their TB medicines. And because of this, many of the world countries, especially in West Africa, cannot afford to buy the newer, the more powerful cures, and they're still using some of the older cures that was first invented back in the 50s. By now, those cures have lost much of its potency because of the antibiotic resistance that over this period of time TB has evolved to resist. Fundamentally, it comes down to whether or not the big pharmaceutical company can make money. They can't, and therefore people are in that part of the world still left with old cures. And this is the harsh reality of capitalism around the world. Now, let me just give you a quick example. Let me digress just a tiny bit. For those of you who has watched my other channel, Global Hopper, you know I am a full-time photographer. I was really lucky to photograph quite a few events that's hosted by Oxford University. In one of those events where some of the MBA students from a Chinese university visited Oxford University for the duration of a week. And during one of the classes, we had a discussion, or they had a discussion about their business. This guy, very successful, multi-millionaire, started to tell us about his business, which is a liaison company that can help those on the verge of death in China to be linked up to some of the best hospitals that the world has to offer, i.e. Harvard University Hospital, and some of the British private hospital. Perhaps those hospitals can offer something that the Chinese hospital can't. So his business model is linking those people who are pretty much facing a death sentence in biologically in China to be rescued by some of the best university hospitals around the world to give them a second chance. And the success rate is staggering. We're looking at 80% of people who China says no hope to be secure, to be cured by those other universities. And we were really applauding, this is fantastic business model. Then he added a sentence that really just punched me in the face with its impact. He said, our company is aimed to save everyone, as long as that everyone can pay millions of dollars without blinking an eye. And that is just a harsh reality. He's not being necessarily evil. He's still, objectively speaking, saving people's life. It just happened that those lives being saved are rich people. And in many ways, this is exactly the same to the business model that's run by pharmaceutical companies. It is not really a criticism individually. It is criticism of the system, the capitalistic system. Anyway, I'm digressing. Let's go back to the book. Now, the reason for John Green to start the whole TB adventure is because of Henry, right? A boy he met in a hospital in Sierra Leone. Throughout the book, there are chapters about Henry, how he was faring, how his mother and father was faring. There's lots of cultural sort of information, there's historical information, and another interesting fact is that Sierra Leone's capital is called Freetown, right? Freetown. There are reasons behind it. Again, I'm gonna leave you to read the book and find out. It's just absolutely fascinating. Really well written. It's short chapters and is not scientific-y at all. Any sort of lay person like me can fully understand the science bits in the book. So it is really, really accessible to a lot of people. So now, recommendation time. Should you buy it? Should you borrow it? Should you skip it? My recommendation is definitely go ahead and borrow it. If you are someone who are interested in disease and biology and general non-fiction, then this is definitely your cup of tea. That is the end of this review, guys. A little bit different than some of the other books that we have been reviewing together. I hope you like the review. If you do, please give it a thumb up, share, and like. I shall see you in the next one. Cheerio.